Copper and rust coat my tongue long after flatlining. Nothing fades quickly. Knowing my weeping wife slipped antifreeze into my morning coffee leaves an ugly stain on my soul. Watching Christine sob over my hospital mattress, wiping fake tears with cashmere sleeves, purchased using my credit card, breaks a man. Monitors screamed, then stopped. Waking up reversed everything. No machines, just hot mugs waiting on granite, and Christine humming, completely unaware my memory holds every agonizing second of my murder. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Eucalyptus and sweet orange. It was the expensive body wash Christine imported from Italy, the one that used to make me press my face into her neck after she got out of the shower. Now, it smelled like an open grave. My eyes snapped open. I didn't gasp like they do in the movies. I just lay there, paralyzed, staring at the familiar popcorn texture of our bedroom ceiling. The ceiling I had spent the last 3 months of my life staring at as my organs quietly shut down. I sucked in a breath. It was a terrifyingly clean intake of air. No rattling in the base of my throat. No sharp stabbing pain under my ribs like shattered glass. My lungs simply filled, expanded, and emptied. I brought my hands to my face. They weren't the skeletal, yellowed claws that had clutched the hospital bed rails. The skin was flushed, the knuckles thick and familiar. I dug my nails into my palm until a sharp pinch radiated up my forearm. Pain. Real, grounding pain. Water was running in the master bathroom. The hum of the exhaust fan vibrated through the drywall. I rolled over, throwing off the heavy duvet. The sudden movement sent a wave of vertigo crashing through me, and I collapsed onto the hardwood floor. The wood was freezing against my bare knees. I pressed my forehead to the floorboards, trying to anchor myself in time and space. My phone sat on the nightstand. I reached up, my arm shaking, and pulled it down. Tuesday, October 14th, 6 months. I was exactly 6 months away from the afternoon my heart would stop in the ICU. 6 months before the agonizing, slow-motion execution she had orchestrated with such terrifying patience. The bathroom water shut off. Panic, sharp and acidic, flooded my stomach. I scrambled back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chest, my heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against my sternum. The doorknob clicked. Christine walked out. She was wrapped in a thick white towel, her blonde hair damp and sticking to her collarbones. Droplets of water clung to her shoulders, catching the pale morning light filtering through the blinds. She was beautiful. That was the most sickening part of it all. Looking at her, I felt a violent collision of muscle memory affection and absolute, paralyzing terror. My brain knew she was a murderer, but my body still reacted to my wife. The contradiction made bile rise in my throat. "You're awake," she said. Her voice was soft, soothing, the exact same tone she used when she held a cool washcloth to my burning forehead in February. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry as dust. "Yeah, you didn't sleep well." She walked over to the vanity, picking up a bottle of lotion. The pump made a wet, squelching sound. "You were tossing and turning all night, Colin, grinding your teeth. I was dying. I wanted to scream. I was suffocating in my own fluids while you checked your stock portfolio on your phone." "Just a bad dream," I forced out. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, hollow, strained. Christine turned, a look of mild concern, wrinkling the space between her eyebrows. She walked to my side of the bed and sat on the edge. The mattress dipped under her weight. I had to force every muscle in my body not to recoil when she reached out and placed the back of her cool, damp hand against my cheek. "You feel a little warm," she murmured. "Maybe you're coming down with something. You've been working too hard at the firm." There it was, the seed, the foundation of the narrative she was going to feed our friends, our family, and my doctors. Colin works too hard. Colin is stressed. Colin's immune system is failing. "Maybe," I said, leaning into her hand, just a fraction of an inch. It took everything in me not to bite her fingers. "I'll take it easy today." "Good," she smiled. It was a gentle, loving smile. Flawless. "I'll make you your smoothie. Extra kale, just how you hate it. But it's good for you." She patted my cheek and stood up, walking out of the bedroom and patting down the carpeted hallway. I sat up. The silence of the room settled around me, heavy and suffocating. I wrapped my arms around my knees and dug my fingers into my own calves. I was alive. I had my money, my company, my health, and the woman making breakfast in the kitchen was actively planning to take it all, leaving me in a box in the ground. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel an immediate, brilliant rush of strategic genius. I just felt violently ill. I rushed to the attached bathroom, gripped the edges of the porcelain toilet, and threw up until my ribs ached. When I finished, I washed my face with freezing water. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was dead, but he wasn't gone. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "Okay." The kitchen smelled of roasted coffee beans and synthetic vanilla. The espresso machine hissed on the counter. Christine was standing by the island, the heavy glass blender pitcher in front of her. I stood in the doorway, my bare feet silent on the tile. I watched her hands. They were precise, moving with the practiced efficiency of a chemist. A handful of spinach, half a green apple, a scoop of protein powder. Then she reached into the deep pantry. My chest tightened. I held my breath. When her hand emerged, she was holding a small, unmarked dropper bottle. It was brown glass, innocent-looking, like a tincture of echinacea or vitamin D. She unscrewed the cap, her face entirely blank, completely devoid of malice. She didn't look like a cartoon villain. She looked like a bored housewife doing chores. 1, 2, 3 drops into the green sludge. Ethylene glycol, thallium, arsenic. I didn't know the exact chemical compound. All I knew was what the doctors had missed until the autopsy. A slow-acting, cumulative toxin that mimicked renal failure and autoimmune collapse. 3 drops a day, just enough to slowly poison the soil without killing the plant overnight. She replaced the cap, put the bottle back on the top shelf behind the extra bags of flour, and hit the blend button. The motor roared, drowning out the blood rushing in my ears. When she turned around, I was sitting at the breakfast nook, scrolling through my phone. I didn't look up, pretending to be absorbed in an email. "Here you go," she said, setting the tall glass in front of me. Condensation was already forming on the outside. "Thanks, sweetie." I picked up the glass. The weight of it felt immense. I brought it to my lips, letting the rim touch my mouth. The smell of the green apple masked whatever metallic bitterness lay beneath. "Drink it all," she chided playfully, leaning against the counter with her own mug of coffee. "You need the vitamins." I tipped the glass back, keeping my lips sealed tight, letting the thick liquid rush against my teeth, but not down my throat. I swallowed loudly, faking the gulp, then set the glass down. Delicious. She beamed. "I'm going to run to the gym. Do you want me to pick up the dry cleaning on my way back?" "That'd be great." I waited until I heard the garage door open, the low rumble of her Range Rover starting, and the eventual quiet as she backed down the driveway. Only then did I sprint to the sink. I dumped the smoothie down the drain, turning the garbage disposal on and flushing it with scorching hot water for a full 2 minutes. I watched the green foam swirl and vanish. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the glass. It shattered against the bottom of the stainless steel basin. A sharp fragment caught the web of my thumb, drawing a thin line of blood. I stared at it. Red, vivid, real. I didn't have time to break down. I had to get to work. The drive to the financial district was a blur of gray asphalt and morning traffic. The leather steering wheel of my Audi felt sticky under my sweating palms. The city looked exactly the same, but the lens I viewed it through had cracked. For the past 10 years, I had built Vanguard Logistics from a single rented warehouse into a supply chain empire. I was worth roughly $80 million. A month before my death, or rather, my future death, I had signed a revised will, leaving everything, including voting control of the board, to Christine. She had convinced me it was the easiest way to avoid probate if the worst happened with my mysterious illness. I parked in the underground garage and took the private elevator up to the top floor. The quiet hum of the building, the polite nods from my employees, the smell of freshly brewed corporate coffee, it all felt absurd. A stage play where I was the only one who knew the script was a tragedy. I bypassed my office and walked straight to the legal department at the end of the hall. Gideon was sitting behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by stacks of manila folders and half-empty coffee cups. He was in his late 50s, a bulldog of a corporate attorney who had been with me since the early days. He looked up, peering over his reading glasses. "Colin, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong?" I closed the heavy wooden door behind me and locked it. The click echoed in the quiet office. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Gideon," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to restructure everything. The trusts, the holding companies, the will, all of it." He frowned, closing the file in front of him. "Restructure? We just updated the estate planning last year. You gave Christine full power of attorney. I need it revoked." Gideon paused. He was a man who read between the lines for a living. He looked at my pale face, the tense line of my shoulders, the Band-Aid I had hastily slapped over my thumb. "Are you two getting a divorce?" he asked quietly. "No." I met his eyes. "If I file for divorce, she gets half, and she gets it immediately. I want her to get nothing. I want to build a firewall around every single asset I own, buried under so many shell companies and blind trusts that a forensic accountant with a decade to spare couldn't trace a dime back to me." Gideon took off his glasses. He wiped the lenses with his tie, stalling. "Colin, setting up that kind of opaque structure, it borders on hostile. What exactly is going on?" "I can't tell you," I said, the truth burning in my throat. "My wife is slipping antifreeze into my morning kale smoothie. If I said it out loud, he'd think I was having a psychotic break. The doctors had found nothing wrong with me early on. The poison was too subtle, too insidious. If I accused her now, I had no proof. She'd play the victim, push for an immediate divorce, take $40 million, and walk away. Or worse, she'd have me committed. "I just need to know if you can do it," I said, my voice hardening. "Can you move the assets quietly? without triggering any notifications to my personal accounts. Gideon stared at me for a long time. The grandfather clock in the corner of his office ticked, loud and rhythmic. Finally, he nodded slowly. I can set up a blind trust in Delaware. Transfer the voting shares of Vanguard into it. From there, we funnel the liquid assets into a series of LLCs. But Colin, if you die, and this is contested, it's going to be a bloodbath in probate court. If I die, I said, standing up, a cold, cynical smile stretching across my face. I want her to spend the rest of her life paying legal fees just to realize the vault is empty. The hardest part wasn't the legal maneuvering, it was the acting. By early November, 3 weeks into my second chance at life, the timeline dictated that my symptoms should be starting. The fatigue, the subtle graying of the skin, the coughing. I had lived through the genuine deterioration of my own body once. Reverse engineering the process took a twisted kind of discipline. I bought theatrical makeup online, having it shipped to a P.O. box. Every morning, after I went to the office, I would lock my door and apply a thin layer of a pale, ashen foundation under my eyes and along my cheekbones, just enough to kill the healthy flush of my skin. I started leaving work early, coming home and collapsing onto the sofa, complaining of migraines and muscle aches. Christine was a phenomenal actress, but watching her perform now, knowing the truth, was a masterclass in psychological horror. It was a Tuesday evening. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our living room. The fireplace was roaring, casting flickering orange shadows across the Persian rug. I was slumped in the armchair, a heavy wool blanket draped over my legs, putting on a show of exhaustion. Christine walked in carrying a tray, a steaming mug of chamomile tea, and 2 Advil. "You look terrible, honey," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. She set the tray down and pressed her cool fingers to my forehead. "No fever, but your skin looks so pale. I just feel drained," I rasped, letting my voice crack slightly. "Like I can't catch my breath." A flash of something crossed her eyes. It was incredibly fast, barely a micro-expression, but I caught it. Satisfaction, a dark, quiet thrill that the poison was working. It made my stomach violently churn. "Drink your tea," she cooed, stroking my hair. "I'll call Dr. Aris tomorrow and get you an appointment. Maybe it's just a severe flu." "Yeah, maybe." I took the mug. She didn't poison the evening tea. I knew from the first time around that the nighttime routine was safe. She only ever spiked the heavy, thick morning smoothies or dark coffees where the taste could hide. Still, swallowing the warm liquid took an act of sheer willpower. "I'm going to take a bath," she said, kissing the top of my head. "Call out if you need me." "I will." I waited until I heard the bath water running upstairs. Then, I threw the blanket off and moved. I didn't have much time. For the past week, I had hired a private investigator, a guy named Finn, who operated out of a strip mall in Queens and asked 0 questions as long as the retainer cleared. I hadn't told Finn about the poison. I just told him I suspected my wife of infidelity. I needed to know what Christine did when I was at the office. I needed to know if she had an accomplice. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Finn. "Check your secure email." I pulled out my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys. I bypassed the standard login and opened the encrypted Proton Mail account I had set up. There was a file attached, 50 photographs. I clicked the first one. The image was grainy, taken with a telephoto lens from across a street. It was a coffee shop downtown. Christine was sitting in a booth by the window. I clicked to the next photo. A man slid into the booth across from her. He was wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal suit. His hair was slicked back. He was laughing at something she said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. I stopped breathing. The air in the room suddenly felt too thick, too hot. It was Oliver. Oliver Vance was Vanguard's chief financial officer. He was my right-hand man, the guy who came to my Christmas parties, who bought me a vintage bottle of scotch on my birthday, who stood by my hospital bed and cried, just as hard as Christine did when the doctor said my kidneys were failing. I scrolled through the rest of the photos rapidly. Oliver and Christine leaving a boutique hotel in Midtown. Oliver and Christine in the back seat of a town car. Oliver handing Christine a small, padded manila envelope. The envelope. That was how she was getting it. She wasn't synthesizing the chemical herself. Oliver was sourcing it. It made perfect sense. As CFO, Oliver knew exactly how much I was worth. He knew the intricacies of my insurance policies. If Christine inherited the estate, Oliver would be perfectly positioned to help her liquidate it, skimming millions off the top and sharing the rest. They weren't just having an affair. They were business partners in my murder. A low, involuntary sound scraped its way out of my throat. It was half laugh, half sob. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes until I saw sparks. The sheer scale of the betrayal threatened to crack my mind in two. It wasn't just my wife. It was the man I had built my legacy with. I closed the laptop and shoved it under the sofa cushion, just as the water upstairs shut off. I walked back to the armchair, picked up the mug of tea, and sat down. I pulled the wool blanket back over my legs. My hands were perfectly steady now. The panic and the nausea were gone, burned away by a cold, crystalline fury. When Christine came back downstairs, wearing a silk robe and smelling of lavender, I looked at her, really looked at her. I didn't see the woman I married anymore. I saw a parasite. "You look a little better," she said, noting my calm demeanor. "I feel a bit better," I lied smoothly. "Just resting. Actually, I was thinking I should invite Oliver over for dinner this weekend. We need to go over the Q3 projections, and I don't think I have the energy to sit in the boardroom." Christine's posture stiffened, just for a fraction of a second. Then, the flawless mask slipped back into place. "That sounds lovely. I'll make the lamb roast he likes." "Perfect," I said, offering her a weak, tired smile. "I can't wait." The smell of rosemary and rendered lamb fat hung heavy in the dining room, rich and suffocating. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, draped in a thick cashmere cardigan that swallowed my shoulders. The thermostat was set to 72, but I kept my hands wrapped around my water glass to mimic a chill. At the opposite end of the table sat Christine, wearing a backless silk slip dress the color of crushed garnets. And to my right, Oliver. He had brought a 2015 Bordeaux. The dark red liquid swirled in his crystal glass like bruised blood. "I'm telling you, Colin, the expansion into the Midwest can wait," Oliver said, carving a piece of the lamb with surgical precision. The silver knife scraped against the porcelain plate, a sharp, violent little sound that made my jaw tight. "The supply chain bottlenecks are easing, sure, but your health is the priority right now. The board understands that. I understand that." He looked at me with those wide, earnest eyes, the same eyes that had watched me wither away in a hospital bed in another life. He was a master of empathy. He projected it so effortlessly that for a terrifying second, I almost believed he cared. Then, I remembered the photo of his hand over Christine's in that downtown booth. I appreciate that, Oliver. I rasped, letting my voice drag, making it sound like drawing breath was a chore. But the firm is my legacy. If I'm not going to be around to see it through, I need to know the foundation is bulletproof. Christine reached over and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was warm. The diamond on her ring finger, the 2-carat emerald cut I had surprised her with in Paris, caught the light of the chandelier. "Don't talk like that, Colin," she murmured, her lower lip trembling with practiced vulnerability. "Dr. Aris said it's just a severe viral fatigue. You're going to be fine." Oliver raised his glass toward her. A solemn, supportive friend. "Christine's right. You're the toughest guy I know. You'll beat this." I wanted to vomit. The sheer audacity of the performance was staggering. They were sitting in my house, drinking my wine, eating off my wedding china, actively accelerating my funeral, while telling me how much they loved me. The psychological dissonance was enough to snap a weaker man's mind in half. I took a slow, trembling sip of water. I hadn't touched my wine. "Actually," I said, leaning back into the chair, letting the shadows of the room deepen the hollows of my face. "I've been doing some thinking about the foundation. I initiated a comprehensive forensic audit of the corporate accounts on Friday. The dining room went dead silent. The only sound was the low crackle of the gas fireplace in the adjacent living room. Oliver's knife stopped moving. It was a microscopic hesitation, a fractional freeze in his motor functions, but I caught it. Christine's hand tightened over mine, her manicured nails digging slightly into my knuckles before she forced herself to relax. "An audit?" Oliver asked. His voice remained smooth, but the pitch had shifted up half an octave. "Colin, we just closed the quarterly books. The accounting department is already stretched thin. Why the sudden need for an external sweep?" "Peace of mind," I whispered, offering a weak, exhausted smile. "If something happens to me, Christine inherits the voting shares. She doesn't know the first thing about commercial logistics or offshore tax structures. I want to make sure there are no leaks, no bad debts. I want a third-party firm to comb through every ledger, every expense account, every vendor contract from the last 3 years." I looked directly into Oliver's eyes. I let the silence stretch, holding his gaze until the air in the room felt thick enough to choke on. "You know how it is, Oliver," I added softly. "People get greedy when they think nobody is watching." Oliver swallowed. I watched his Adam's apple bob against his starched collar. He recovered quickly, offering a tight, professional nod. "Of course, if it gives you peace of mind, I'll clear the way for the auditors on Monday." "Good." I picked up my fork and pushed a piece of lamb around my plate. "It's funny, though. The lead auditor I hired, he specializes in embezzlement. Says 90% of the time, it's the person you trust most in the room." Christine abruptly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Her face was pale, the garnet dress suddenly looking too bright against her skin. "I'll get the dessert," she announced, her voice clipped and breathless. I made a tart. As she practically fled into the kitchen, Oliver reached for his wine glass. His hand was shaking. Just a tremor, but it was there. I lowered my head, staring at the table linen to hide the vicious, adrenaline-fueled grin spreading across my face. The poison in my system from my past life was gone, but a new kind of toxicity was taking root. I was beginning to enjoy this. The next morning, Christine went to her 9 a.m. Pilates class. The second her Range Rover cleared the driveway, I was moving. I went straight to the kitchen pantry. The air inside smelled of dried pasta, cinnamon, and the dusty cardboard of cereal boxes. I reached behind the bags of flour on the top shelf. My fingers brushed the cold, smooth glass of the brown dropper bottle. I pulled it out and held it up to the fluorescent kitchen light. The liquid inside was slightly viscous, completely clear. Death, neatly packaged in a 2-ounce glass vial. I took a small, sterilized plastic tube I had bought from a pharmacy and carefully squeezed 5 drops of the toxin into it, sealing it tight. Finn, the private investigator, was picking it up at noon to take it to a private toxicology lab. I needed a paper trail of the exact chemical compound. Then I carried the brown bottle to the sink. I dumped the rest of the poison down the drain, flushing it with bleach. Now came the delicate part. I had to replace the liquid with something that looked and behaved exactly the same, but wouldn't kill me. I mixed distilled water with a few drops of vegetable glycerin to match the thickness. Then, to mimic the bitter, chemical undertone I remembered from the smoothies, I added a heavy dose of concentrated wormwood extract. It was intensely bitter, harmless, and tasted exactly like a mistake. I poured the mixture back into the brown bottle, screwed the dropper cap on tight, and placed it exactly where I found it behind the flour. When Christine came home, her skin was flushed with exertion, her workout clothes clinging to her. She went straight to the kitchen to make my morning smoothie. I sat at the island, typing on my laptop, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She reached into the pantry. She pulled out the bottle. 3 drops. She hit the blender. She poured the green sludge into a glass and slid it across the marble counter toward me. "Drink up, Colin," she said. There was an edge to her voice today. The paranoia from last night's dinner was still lingering in the bags under her eyes. I didn't hesitate. I didn't hold my breath. I picked up the glass, looked her dead in the eyes, and took a massive, gulping swallow. The bitter, earthy taste of the wormwood hit the back of my tongue. I didn't flinch. I drank the entire glass in one go, slammed it down on the counter, and wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. "Delicious," I said. Christine stared at the empty glass, a flicker of profound confusion crossing her face. The real psychological warfare began that afternoon at Dr. Aris's clinic. The exam room smelled aggressively of rubbing alcohol and bleached paper. I sat on the edge of the exam table, wearing a paper gown that crinkled loudly with every breath. I had spent 30 minutes in the clinic bathroom, applying the gray theatrical foundation under my eyes and dabbing a faint yellowish tint onto my collarbones. I looked like a man with one foot in the grave. I kept my shoulders slumped, my breathing shallow. Christine sat in the plastic guest chair in the corner, her hands tightly gripping her Prada purse. She was playing the role of the terrified wife flawlessly, her eyes wide, chewing on her lower lip. Dr. Aris, a gray-haired physician with a gentle demeanor, walked in holding a manila folder. He looked down at the papers, then up at me, adjusting his glasses. He looked perplexed. "Well, Colin," Dr. Aris began, pulling up a rolling stool and sitting down. "I have to admit, I'm a bit baffled." Christine leaned forward, her voice trembling. "What is it, doctor? Is it his kidneys? He's been so weak. He can barely get out of bed." Dr. Aris shook his head, tapping the file. "That's just it, Christine. I ran the full comprehensive metabolic panel. We checked renal function, liver enzymes, complete blood count, inflammatory markers. We even ran a heavy metal toxicity screen, just to be exhaustive." Christine's knuckles turned white around her purse strap. I kept my face slack, watching her peripheral reaction. "And?" I asked, my voice a raspy whisper. "And you are in spectacular health," Dr. Aris said, dropping the file onto the counter. "Your kidney function is sitting at 100%. Your liver enzymes are textbook. Your red blood cell count is perfect. Colin, on paper, you have the biology of a 25-year-old athlete." The silence in the room was absolute. I slowly turned my head to look at Christine. Her mouth was slightly parted. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking genuinely, entirely horrified. Her brain was violently short-circuiting. She knew she had been dropping poison into my drink for over a month. She had watched me deteriorate. She was looking at my gray, sunken face. But the science said I was indestructible. "I don't understand," Christine stammered, her voice cracking for real this time. "Look at him. He looks terrible. He threw up yesterday. He can barely walk upstairs. I see that he looks fatigued," Dr. Aris said gently, turning to me. "Colin, have you been under an unusual amount of stress at work?" "A little," I lied, looking down at my hands. "I just feel hollowed out. I strongly suspect we are looking at a severe psychosomatic response," the doctor concluded. "Extreme stress, perhaps coupled with clinical depression, can manifest in devastating physical symptoms. Your brain is telling your body it's dying, but your organs are perfectly fine." I nodded slowly, letting out a shaky breath. "So, I'm not dying?" "You are absolutely not dying," Dr. Aris smiled. I looked at Christine. "Did you hear that, honey? I'm perfectly healthy." Christine swallowed hard. Her eyes were darting frantically between me and the doctor. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. The poison wasn't working. Or worse, she was being scammed. That's wonderful news," she whispered. Her smile looked like a jagged tear across her face. As we walked out to the car, the silence between us was electric. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head. She was going to call Oliver the second I was out of earshot. She was going to accuse him of buying fake poison. They were going to tear each other apart from the inside out, and I hadn't even fired a single shot yet. Gideon called me on a burner phone I had purchased with cash at a gas station. It was Thursday, 11 a.m. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, looking down at the crawling yellow taxis on the wet pavement below. "It's done." Gideon's voice was crisp, entirely devoid of emotion. He was a professional. "The Delaware Blind Trust is fully executed. Your voting shares are locked inside. The liquid assets from the joint brokerage accounts, roughly $32 million, have been funneled through the offshore holding companies and settled into the new LLCs." "All of it?" I asked, watching my own breath fog the cold glass. "Everything that isn't nailed down or legally required to remain in the marital estate," Gideon confirmed. "I left the primary checking account active so she doesn't panic immediately. But the balance is capped at $20,000. The black Amex is tethered to a closed account. It will decline on the next swipe." "Thank you, Gideon." "Colin," he paused, "if you recover from whatever illness this is, undoing this web is going to cost you a fortune in tax penalties." "It's a price I'm willing to pay," I said, and hung up. I slid the burner phone into my jacket pocket and walked over to my desk. I pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, send Oliver in, please." 2 minutes later, Oliver strolled through my door. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his trademark slick hair was slightly out of place. Christine had been getting to him. I could only imagine the frantic, vicious arguments they were having over burner phones. She blaming him for the doctor's report, him swearing the chemical was authentic. The paranoia was eating them alive. "You wanted to see me, Colin?" he asked, sitting in the leather chair opposite my desk. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oliver, good. Sit." I didn't offer him a drink. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the mahogany desk. I had washed off the theatrical makeup this morning. I looked sharp, hydrated, ruthless. Oliver blinked, taking in my sudden vitality. "You look better today." Dr. Eris adjusted some things. "Turns out, my body is surprisingly resilient," I said smoothly. "But I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about the stress, about me needing to take a step back." Oliver's posture straightened. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment I handed him the keys to the kingdom. "I think that's incredibly wise, Colin. You need to focus on your recovery. The team and I have everything under control here." "I know you do," I smiled. "It was a cold, reptilian thing, which is why I've authorized a total restructuring of the executive board's financial oversight." Oliver's brow furrowed. "Restructuring?" "Yes. Effective immediately. Your signature authority on all Vanguard corporate accounts over $50,000 is revoked." The color drained out of Oliver's face so fast he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Furthermore," I continued, sliding a heavy bound folder across the desk toward him, "the external audit I mentioned at dinner, it's not just a sweep. I've ordered them to do a deep dive forensic analysis on the Cayman Island vendor contracts you set up last year, the ones with the unusually high shipping tariffs. Those were the contracts Oliver was using to skim off the top. I knew about them in my past life, but I had let it slide because he was my friend, and the margins were small enough to ignore. Now, it was the noose I was wrapping around his neck. "Colin, Oliver stammered, his polished veneer shattering completely. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. "This is highly irregular. If you revoke my signing authority, it signals a lack of confidence to the shareholders. It paralyzes my ability to do my job. Your job is to manage the projections, Oliver, not the cash flow," I said softly, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "The auditors will need full access to your personal emails and your hard drive by 3 p.m. today. If you have nothing to hide, it's just protocol." He stared at the folder like it was a live grenade. He was trapped. If he quit, it looked like an admission of guilt. If he stayed, the auditors would find the skimming, and I would have him arrested for federal wire fraud. He was utterly paralyzed. "Are we clear, Oliver?" He swallowed hard. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He realized the frail, dying man he had been plotting against was entirely gone. "Clear," he whispered. He stood up on shaky legs, took the folder, and walked out of my office. My desk phone rang almost immediately. It was my private cell line. "Christine." I let it ring 3 times, savoring the sound, before picking it up. "Hello, sweetie," I answered, my tone light, breezy. "Colin." Her voice was a tight, panicked hiss. "I'm at Neiman Marcus. I was trying to buy that suit for your hospital gala next month, and my card declined." "Declined?" I feigned shock. "That's impossible. Did you use the black card?" "Yes, I used the black card. The cashier tried it 3 times. It said the account was closed." "Colin, it was humiliating. What is going on?" I leaned back in my chair, swiveling to look out at the skyline. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart over the city. "That is so strange," I said slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her skin crawl. "I'll have Gideon look into it on Monday. Maybe it's a fraud alert. You know how careful we have to be these days, with people trying to take what doesn't belong to them." Christine didn't say a word. All I heard was the ragged, shallow sound of her breathing through the receiver. "Just put it back on the rack, honey," I whispered softly. "I'll be home for dinner." I hung up, dropping the phone onto the desk. I had stripped the CFO of his power. I had cut off my wife's money. I was drinking her poison and smiling at her. The trap wasn't just set. The jaws had violently snapped shut. Now, I just had to sit back and watch them try to chew their own legs off to escape. The audio file Finn sent me at 2 a.m. hissed with the static of a cheap dashboard microphone. I sat in my dark office, the pale blue light of the monitor washing over my face, wearing a pair of noise-canceling headphones. The recording was from Oliver's car, parked in the damp, unlit rear lot of a suburban strip mall. "You told him." Oliver's voice was a ragged, breathless whisper. It sounded like he was chewing on his own tongue. "You panicked about the money, and you fed him the Cayman accounts to buy yourself time." "Are you out of your mind?" Christine's voice cracked, shrill and violently defensive. The leather passenger seat creaked as she shifted. "My cards are declining, Oliver. My Amex was cut in half at Neiman Marcus. He's draining the accounts. And the drops aren't working. He looks better than he did 6 months ago. You gave me tap water. You cheap, arrogant piece of... I bought industrial-grade ethylene glycol derivative on the dark web." Oliver slammed his hands against the steering wheel. The heavy thud made me wince, even through the headphones. "It cost me 30 grand in Bitcoin. If he's not dead, it's because you're screwing up the dosage. You're losing your nerve. I put in 5 drops today. 5. He drank it and asked for seconds." Christine was crying now. The ugly, wet sobs of a cornered animal. "He knows, Oliver." I look at him across the table, and it's like he's looking straight through my skin. He knows. He doesn't know. Oliver's breathing was shallow, frantic. If he knew about the poison, he'd go to the police. He's just getting paranoid about the business. Tomorrow, the auditors hit my hard drive. If I don't give them a scapegoat, I'm going to federal prison. "What are you saying?" The tears stopped instantly. Her tone went dead and flat. "I'm saying..." Oliver paused, and I could hear the wet smack of his lips as he swallowed, "that the Cayman accounts are tied to an LLC. The registered agent on that LLC is your maiden name, Christine. I set it up that way, as a failsafe." Silence. A thick, suffocating silence filled the interior of the car. "You set me up," she whispered. "I protected the firm. If you don't figure out a way to finish Colin by tomorrow night, I'm handing the Cayman documents to Gideon. I'll tell them you forced me to embezzle to fund your lifestyle. Who do you think they'll believe? The loyal CFO or the gold-digging wife whose husband is mysteriously falling ill?" A car door unlatched, the heavy thud of it slamming shut. I took off the headphones. The silence of the house crashed in on me. I rubbed my temples, my fingers slick with cold sweat. I had engineered this exact scenario. I had squeezed them until the pressure cracked their alliance, turning them into rabid dogs locked in a cage together. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt a heavy, leaden exhaustion. My chest ached, a phantom pain from a hospital bed that no longer existed. I had loved her. That was the brutal, inescapable truth. I had loved the woman who just screamed in a parking lot because her attempts to murder me were failing. The next morning, the smell of roasted coffee felt abrasive. I walked into the kitchen wearing a tailored navy suit. Christine was standing by the island. The blender was dirty in the sink. 2 glasses of green smoothie sat on the marble counter. She looked awful. The flawless makeup couldn't hide the bruised, purple exhaustion under her eyes. Her hands were shaking so badly, the ice water in her glass was vibrating. "Good morning," I said, my voice quiet, carrying no edge. "Morning." She didn't look at me. She pushed the taller glass toward me. "Drink up. You have a big day." I looked at the glass. The condensation was bleeding down the sides. Then I looked at her glass. I reached out, bypassing the tall glass, and wrapped my fingers around hers. "I'll take this one today," I said, pulling her glass across the marble. Christine froze. The air in the kitchen snapped tight. Her eyes locked onto mine, pupils blown wide, swallowing the green of her irises. She stopped breathing. "Colin," she whispered, her voice barely working. That one is mine. It has collagen in it. Yours has the extra protein." "I don't mind." I lifted her glass. I brought it to my lips. "No." She lunged forward, her manicured nails digging into my forearm, pulling the glass down so hard the green liquid sloshed over the rim, staining my white cuff. Her chest was heaving. She was staring at the glass like it was a live grenade. I looked at her hand on my arm. Then I looked up at her face. I didn't yell. I didn't rip my arm away. I just stared at her with a profound, crushing emptiness. "Why not, Christine?" I asked softly. She opened her mouth, but only a dry, clicking sound came out. She let go of my arm and took a step back, her back hitting the stainless steel refrigerator. "I have to go to work," I said, setting the glass down. "The auditors are finalizing their report on Oliver today. You should probably pack a bag. I think things are going to get complicated." I walked out through the garage. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel her unraveling through the walls. The storm broke over the city at 7 p.m. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room, distorting the street lights into smeared streaks of yellow and red. I was sitting in the dark in the leather armchair, a glass of bourbon resting on my knee. The house was entirely silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass. Christine hadn't left. I knew she wouldn't. She had nowhere to go, no money to run, and the crushing realization that her safety net was gone had paralyzed her. She was upstairs, locked in the guest bedroom. The front door chimed. A heavy, frantic pounding followed. I didn't move. I took a sip of the bourbon. It burned all the way down, settling like hot coals in my stomach. The pounding continued, desperate. I heard the lock click open. Christine had come downstairs. I remained in the dark, obscured by the high back of the chair, listening. The heavy oak door swung open, bringing the smell of wet asphalt and ozone into the foyer. "Oliver," Christine hissed. "Are you insane? You can't be here. Where is he?" Oliver's voice was slurred. He was drenched, his expensive wool coat plastered to his shoulders. He sounded frantic, unhinged. "He's not home," Christine lied, her voice shaking. "Get out. If he sees you." "It doesn't matter." Oliver shoved past her, his wet shoes squeaking violently against the hardwood. "The auditors flagged it. All of it. They found the Cayman shell companies. They seized my company phone, my laptop. Gideon told me I have until Monday to resign and surrender my passport, or they go to the FBI. "I told you," Christine said, her voice rising in panic. I told you he knew. You dragged me into this. I dragged you? Oliver let out a wet, ugly laugh. He turned on her, backing her against the console table. The sound of a ceramic vase rattling against the wall echoed in the hall. You came to me. You told me you couldn't wait 5 years for his liver to fail naturally. You asked me for the connect. I have the text messages, Christine. I printed them out. They're in a safety deposit box. You're bluffing, she spat, though the terror in her voice betrayed her. I'm not going to federal prison for you, Oliver growled. You are going to transfer the cash from his offshore trust into my account tonight, so I can disappear. Or I swear to God, I will walk into the precinct and tell them you've been feeding him antifreeze since September. I stood up. I walked out of the shadows of the living room and stepped into the dim light of the foyer. She can't do that, Oliver, I said. They both spun around. Christine clamped a hand over her mouth, a muffled sob tearing from her throat. Oliver staggered back, his face completely devoid of color, the rainwater dripping off his chin. Colin, Oliver stammered, raising his hands defensively. Listen to me. She's crazy. She came to me months ago. She was plotting against you. Shut up. I didn't yell. The 2 words just fell out of my mouth, heavy and final as a judge's gavel. Oliver's jaw snapped shut. I walked over to the console table and set my bourbon glass down. The clink of the crystal against the wood sounded like a gunshot. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I tossed it onto the table between them. Those are the photos from my private investigator, I said smoothly, pointing to the envelope. You and my wife at the Midtown Hotel. You handing her the padded envelope. And beneath those are the lab results from the independent toxicology screen. It outlines the exact chemical composition of the ethylene glycol derivative you bought on the dark web. Christine's knees buckled. She sank to the floor, her silk dress pooling around her, pressing her face into her hands. The sound she made was agonizing, a hollow, scraping keen of total defeat. Oliver stared at the envelope like it was a coiled snake. His chest heaved. You knew. The whole time? The doctor. Dr. Aris told you exactly what was in my blood, I said, stepping closer to him. The smell of his fear was pungent. Sour sweat and stale alcohol masking the expensive cologne. I stopped drinking your little cocktail 3 weeks ago, Oliver. I replaced it with wormwood and distilled water. You've been poisoning me with herbal tea. Oliver's eyes darted frantically toward the door. He was calculating the distance. Calculating if he could run. Don't, I warned him softly. Gideon is parked at the end of the street in a black Suburban. There are 2 federal agents in the back seat. The moment you step off this porch, they're going to cuff you for corporate espionage, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Oliver opened his mouth, trying to pull air into his seizing lungs. Colin, please. I'm sorry. I got in over my head. The money. It was just the money. It's always the money, I said, the exhaustion finally bleeding into my voice. But you didn't just steal from me, Oliver. You watched me die. You stood by my hospital bed and held my hand while my organs shut down, knowing exactly why it was happening. Oliver looked confused. Hospital bed? Colin, you were never in the hospital. No, I whispered, the ghost of my previous life rattling in my lungs. I guess I wasn't. I turned my back on him and looked down at Christine. She was weeping into the hardwood floor, her shoulders shaking violently. This was the woman I had kissed at the altar, the woman I had built a house with, the woman who had measured out my death in 3-drop increments. "Christine," I said. She didn't look up. "You don't have a dime. The offshore trusts are blind. The primary accounts are frozen. The prenup dictates that in the event of documented infidelity, you forfeit alimony. And since you're about to be indicted for attempted murder, I don't think you'll have much use for a divorce attorney anyway. I loved you." She sobbed into the floorboards. A desperate, pathetic lie thrown into the dark. "I did, Colin. At the beginning, I really did." "I know," I said. My voice cracked. I hated that it cracked, but it did. That's what makes this so pathetic. I reached over, picked up my glass of bourbon, and took a slow, agonizing sip. "Take him," I said quietly, speaking to the empty air. The heavy oak door swung open behind Oliver. He spun around, letting out a sharp, terrified yelp as 2 men in dark windbreakers stepped into the foyer. Rain swept in behind them, soaking the Persian rug. Gideon stood on the porch, holding an umbrella. He didn't look at me. He just nodded at the agents. They grabbed Oliver by the arms. He didn't fight. The fight had completely drained out of him. He just sagged into their grip, weeping silently as they dragged him out into the storm. A third agent, a woman with a hard, unreadable face, stepped inside and walked over to Christine. "Stand up, ma'am," she ordered, pulling a pair of steel cuffs from her belt. Christine looked up at me. Her face was smeared with mascara, her eyes bloodshot and wide, with a terror so profound it made her look like a stranger. She reached a hand out toward me. Her fingers trembled in the cold air. "Colin," she begged. It was a raw, primal sound. I didn't step back, but I didn't reach for her either. I just watched as the agent hauled her to her feet, wrenched her arms behind her back, and snapped the metal shut around her wrists. The click of the cuffs echoed in the vast, empty foyer. As they walked her out the door, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers, reflecting off the wet pavement, washed over the walls of my beautiful, hollow house. The trial was a media circus, but I didn't attend. I let Gideon handle the onslaught of reporters in the agonizing theater of the courtroom. The evidence was insurmountable. Finn's photos, the audio recordings, the dark web server logs Oliver hadn't fully scrubbed, and the toxicology report on the bottle from the pantry. Oliver cracked first. He took a plea deal, turning state's evidence against Christine in exchange for 15 years in a white-collar federal facility. He confessed to everything: the embezzlement, the sourcing of the chemical, the coordination. Christine fought it. She spent the last of her borrowed money on a bulldog defense attorney who tried to paint her as a battered wife, manipulated by a predatory CFO. It didn't work. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, 25 years to life, attempted murder in the first degree. When Gideon called to tell me the verdict, I was standing on the balcony of a rented flat in Rome. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long golden shadows across the terracotta rooftops. The air smelled of baked bread and Vespa exhaust. "It's over, Colin," Gideon said, his voice crackling slightly over the international line. "She was remanded immediately. She's gone." "Thank you, Gideon. Are you coming back?" he asked gently. "Vanguard needs its CEO. The board is getting anxious." "Tell the board to trigger the succession clause," I said, leaning against the wrought iron railing. The metal was warm against my palms. "I'm selling my shares to the conglomerate. You can facilitate the buyout." Gideon was quiet for a long time. "You're walking away from all of it? You fought so hard To protect the money, Colin. To protect the company. I didn't fight to protect the company, I murmured, watching a flock of pigeons scatter from the piazza below. I fought to make sure they didn't get it. I hung up the phone and slipped it into my pocket. Revenge, I realized, is not a meal. It doesn't sustain you. It is a fire. It burns bright and hot, keeping the darkness away while it consumes the oxygen in the room. But when the fuel is gone, when the people who hurt you are locked away in concrete boxes, the fire dies out, and you are left standing in the ashes, shivering in the cold. I survived. I beat the Reaper. I took the poison out of my blood and out of my life. But as I walked back into the quiet, empty flat, running my hand along the edge of a strange table in a strange city, I knew the truth. The man who had married Christine, who had built that empire, died in that hospital bed. I was just the ghost that came back to settle the ledger. And now, the ledger was balanced. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and drank it down. It tasted clean. It tasted like nothing at all. I closed my eyes and breathed in the silence. It was time to figure out how to be alive again. The ledger is balanced, and the ghost has finally found his peace. What did you think of Colin's cold, calculated destruction of the woman who tried to end his life? Did he go too far, or did Christine and Oliver get exactly the punishment they deserved? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you felt your heart pounding during this reborn revenge story, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next intense, dramatic tale.